Hello everyone, and welcome back to Realm of the Lich King. I am Destro, and this time around we're doing Goobertown Roulette. For this season I've already rolled my mini. I have a pile, and I used a d20 to select this one, and we've got one that I've been liking to do for a little while here. All that's left is to roll for theme. Got my little d6, give that a quick tumble, and 2. So that's summer. This season's theme is, well, seasons. Let's get to it. So this is the first time that I'm painting an established character for the channel, and I wanted to dive a little bit into the lore and background for Marco Colombo. Marco Colombo is best known as the explorer who discovered Lustria, though it was really discovered years before by the Norska. Marco was, however, the first Old Worlder to establish friendly relations with the Lizardmen, back before they were called the Seraphon. The story of how this came about is actually fairly entertaining, and so I thought I'd share a little bit of it with you guys as I'm painting this miniature. On the eve of the feast of sacred Myrmidia, our lookout in the crow's nest sighted land. I was sure it was Lustria at last. We had been at sea for 144 days, and the men were getting restless. For the last few days I had seen mutiny in their eyes. Now everybody cheered, and the prospect of fresh water, food, and perhaps riches banished all thoughts of mischief from their minds. We anchored offshore and prepared to land the next day. The next day I ordered the Skaven captives, that I had purchased at great expense from Giacomo of Merigliano, to be brought out of the hold. They stank and squealed their foul curses at us. All the crew were glad to be rid of them at last. Their presence aboard ship was one of the major grouses which the men held against me. However, I knew what I was doing, and the inconvenience would soon bring forth the rewards for which I had hoped. The captives were rowed ashore and staked out on the beach, together with a heap of treasures I had collected from all over the old world. These treasures had been looted from Lustria over the centuries, and again, at great expense, I had sought them out and bought them for this expedition. Then I ordered the men to row back to the ships. When we were all safely on board again, I ordered that the great guns be fired to attract the attention of the inhabitants. I repeated this order every hour, even though the men thought I was mad to waste so much gunpowder. Sunset was approaching, and I myself was wondering whether all this effort was in vain when they appeared. We were anchored close enough inshore to see them clearly without a spyglass. There were about 50, at least, of the smaller kind, which are called skinks. Their leader was a magnificent fellow, decorated with great plumes and accompanied by a drummer and one carrying a standard in the form of a coiled serpent. We watched them inspecting the heap of treasure. They became very excited. Then their leader ordered them to take up the Skaven captives, which they did with great enthusiasm, binding them to carrying poles and disappearing back into the jungle. The treasure was likewise bundled up and taken away. Next day, at sunrise, we observed a huge pile of fruit and gourds on the beach where our gifts had been. I sent several rowing boats out to fetch it. Our breakfast turned out to be quite a feast. The fruit was most welcome and necessary, since many of the crew had scurvy. The alcoholic beverages in the gourds were very potent, excellent stuff indeed. The dried insects were also most agreeable. One of the things that this excerpt demonstrates is that Marco, as a Tilian, is very familiar with the existence of the Skaven, whereas in the Empire they were denied and people didn't really believe in the existence of ratmen under every major city. The Tilians know better. I'd also like to take this opportunity to point out here that I have been a little bit lazy with the eyes. Filling them in with ink isn't, great painting or anything, but it works fine at this scale. But back to Mr. Colombo. Marco, afterwards, goes ashore, meets with the skinks, and offers his service to the lizardmen as a mercenary. He has ships and cannons, and will be able to sink incoming enemy ships before they can arrive to plunder the lizardmen temples. The enemies that he'd be sinking are also the enemies of Tilia and the Empire and all of that, so no big deal there. He's gonna sink them anyways, and he might as well get paid for it. They said that they had consulted their oracles and were expecting further visits from barbarians, and that these would not be reasonable people like me. This being so, they would hire my services, but not for gold, which was reserved for sacred artifacts. I asked what they were prepared to offer. They showed me many products of their land, including spice, scrubs, various potions, and tusks from the great reptiles that they used as beasts of burden. Some of these looked like they might fetch a high price in the old world, but it would be a gamble, and my men were expecting gold. Then I noticed that one of the skink scribes had an abacus for doing his calculations. I looked closer at it and could not believe my eyes. The beads on it were the most perfect and enormous pearls I had ever seen. Immediately I asked, "Have you got any more of these?" To this they replied that they had countless amounts. They were in the habit of spitting them out after a good meal of freshwater clams. "They will do very nicely," I said, and to my surprise, they offered me as many as I wanted. With my usual quick thinking, I added, "Throw in the spices and potions, and it's a deal." They seemed amazingly satisfied with this arrangement. That's it for the excerpts this time around. There's more of them. I only picked about 2 out of 5, and they're filled with fantastic old punny lizardman names and all that sort of thing. You can check them out if you're interested, but I only wanted to pick a couple of my favorites to go over while we were painting Mr. Colombo here. Speaking of painting, Marco's got a lot of fun little details on him. I like these little scrolls and things that he's carrying. He's got these frilly sleeves, the very old style, and of course the solid bronze codpiece here. But, yeah, he's fun to paint. He's got a lot of interesting little finery and bits on things on him. This rope here, though, I'm painting it with desert yellow, and desert yellow is a wretched paint. I think this rope mostly exists to add a little bit of extra stability to the miniature. You can easily picture Marco standing on a dock or the deck of a ship or something like that with this little coil of rope next to him, but I rolled summer for my Goobertown Roulette, so I have something a little bit different in mind for his base. More on that when we come to it. And by now we've reached the stage where all I have left to paint on the miniature is little fiddly bits and things, tons of tiny details here and there, and it's a bit of a struggle to get through this sometimes, but I did power through it. And since Marco is a named character, some of these are even items and things that were represented in his rules. One of those is represented on his character here. It is a gourd of lustrian wine. This was one of his magic items back in the old wargame days, and was usable once per battle at the start of turn to give him plus 1d6 strength until end of turn. I wanted to represent that this was a gift from the lizardman, so I painted it like a calabash gourd, which are the sort of canteen gourds used in South America, and put a lizardman glyph on it. You'll see that a little bit later. In the meantime, please enjoy this footage of me blacklining and using inks and washes and things to add a little bit of extra contrast to that big muddled pile of tools that Marco is holding. And, of course, placing a bit of color on here. I prefer the cool colors myself, but with summer, I painted him mostly in warm. The telescope Marco is holding also had special rules, though it was a very situational item. At the start of the battle, it allowed Marco to roll for each enemy unit on the field, and on a 4+, the opposing player had to reveal any troops or characters who would normally be hidden until revealed within that unit. This applied to things like Night Goblin fanatics and Skaven assassins and the like. Funny enough, the rules for Marco give him a warhorse, but both of the miniatures for him, he's on foot. They've never sculpted a miniature of Marco Colombo using a horse, but the rules for him had one. Just one of those funny little pieces of trivia you run into sometimes with old models from the metal era. Marco, in this incarnation, is of course the pewter version. There is a plastic one as well that was released much later, but I don't have that one. And really, I kind of like this sculpt better. I like Marco with the beard and looking all grizzled and purposeful. In the other sculpt, he's holding like a crystal skull sort of thing, which is just a bad time. For the lenses on the telescope and the gems on Marco, I've painted these in pretty much the same way, so I'm only really showing the telescope lens in detail. I do gems the same way basically every time I paint them. It's always just a few different layers of color, and then a final tiny dot of an off-white. Or white, if I don't have an off-white in the appropriate color. For this telescope, I did actually blackline the rim around the gem a little bit as well, to give it a bit of extra distinction and hide some places where paint had flowed into the recesses. But with the lenses down, there's really only one thing left to do on Marco, and I saved the best for last. It's time for a power painting montage. And finishing up the feathers with another use of good old deck tan. Leaving this a little bit spotty helped show some of the color from beneath through and really kind of made it look a little bit translucent, like feather plumes are. So that was cool. These feathers, if you hadn't guessed, are based on the feathers of a couple varieties of South American macaws. I figured that would be a good way to go for Marco. Final thing to do is, of course, the base, and I've got a few little dollar store plastic plants kind of here, and clipped them off of big plumes, so I got lots of those left over if I ever want to do some jungle terrain. Hit them with a quick wash of VALLEJO black-green ink to bring out little details and things on the leaves. Unfortunately, some of the footage is a little bit blurry. I think it was really hard to get the camera to focus on these tiny fronds of plastic plants. Hit them with a bit of livery green just to brighten up the edges using an old ratty brush here, and that was it for the plants. Then I just had to drill a few holes in the bases and stick them down and start to work on Papadestro's old-fashioned texture paste. This stuff is made with a mixture of paint, glue, baking soda, construction sand, and just for flavor, a little bit of oregano. Oh yeah, Italian seasoning. Perfect for Italian Explorer. And perfect to add a little bit of sort of foliage-looking clumps to some jungle terrain base. I've done a few different incarnations of jungle base, and so far this is my favorite method. Here you can see Marco with the plants all stuck to his base, and here you can see me using the toothpick method to just kind of poke texture paste into the areas that needed color. Once this is dry, it gets a quick wash of black ink, and that's it for Marco. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and as we move into the glamour shots here, I hope you enjoy Marco in all of his Tillian glory. Brent, if you're watching, I hope you approve of this entry for this season's Goobertown Roulette, and I do hope to see everyone again next time here on Realm of the Lich King.